Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony. My name is Yana Johnson, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Air Force is Group Captain David Richardson. We warmly welcome the family of Air Mechanic Second Class George Lonsdale Taylor, whose story will be told shortly. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria and RSL Queensland who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the pool of reflection by family and visitors to the memorial. If you are able, please stand and join in singing the national anthem. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which he remained true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we'll read the story behind just one of those in the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and operations for more than a century. But first we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths of floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today, we remember and pay tribute to Air Mechanic Second Class George Lonsdale Taylor. George Lonsdale Taylor was born on the 14th of July 1900 in the Melbourne suburb of Croydon, one of 5 surviving children of John Lonsdale and Emma Mary Taylor. Soon after his birth, the family moved to Albury in New South Wales, where George attended school. On leaving school, he worked as an accountant before taking work as a jackaroo and farmhand on a nearby station. George was keen to join the war effort. As a 17-year-old, he enlisted at Sydney Showgrounds in October 1917, falsely claiming that he was 21 years old. 3 days after he was recruited, however, his true age was discovered and he was discharged. 2 months later, in December 1917, he enlisted in the Australian Imperial Force at Grafton, this time giving his age as 19. His parents signed their consent to him serving overseas, and this attempt to join the army was successful. In February 1918, George was transferred to the 2nd Squadron Australian Flying Corps and began training at the airbase at Laverton in Victoria. He trained there as an aircraft mechanic for 8 months. On the 5th of October 1918, 101 years ago today, he embarked at Melbourne on the transport ship Zealandic, arriving in London in early December. By this time, the war had ended, and George spent Christmas at the Royal Air Force camp at Blandford in Dorset. George wrote letters home to his family while he was training and sailing. Writing to his eldest sister Ethel, George was not able to reveal military details. Instead, he asked after the family and sent his love. On board the ship to England, George worked as a mess orderly, and he signed off one letter noting that he was being called away by his corporal to organise rations. When George joined the Australian Flying Corps, aviation was in its infancy. During the war, all the belligerent powers realised the advantages that air superiority could bring, and they developed new aircraft and new tactics. By the end of the war, aeroplanes had been used as fighters, spotters for artillery, bombers, and photographic reconnaissance. The 2nd Squadron had been involved in the Allied attainment of almost complete dominance of the air by the time of the armistice. With the war over, the men of the 2nd Squadron were now sent to evaluate and study captured German aircraft. For this reason, George was sent to France in early January 1919. By the end of that month, however, he had contracted influenza and was hospitalised. He was declared dangerously ill on the 6th of February, and he died on the 11th of February 1919. He was 18 years old. Most wartime censors minimised early reports of illness and mortality, but with the papers free to report the epidemic's effects in neutral Spain, the country appeared to be particularly hard hit, and so the pandemic earned the nickname the Spanish flu. Around 500 million people were infected worldwide, resulting in the deaths of 50 to 100 million. Today, George's remains lie buried in Lille Southern Cemetery in France, near the site of the British Army's 39th Stationary Hospital, where he died. He was survived by his parents and 4 sisters, Edith, Ethel, Winifred, and Catherine. Air Mechanic Second Class George Lonsdale Taylor is listed on the Roll of Honour on my right, among more than 60,000 Australians who died while serving in the First World War. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Air Mechanic Second Class George Lonsdale Taylor, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they'll be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. We thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial and we wish you all a very good evening.